One of the greatest films ever made, and one of my favorite films of all time, is Woodstock. Michael Wadleigh's 1970 Academy Award winning film about the festival in 1969. And it won the Oscar for Best Documentary Feature in 1970. To me, it is not only the greatest rock documentary, probably one of the greatest documentaries ever made, probably one of the greatest American films ever made. And a number of factors have to do with that. Roger Ebert himself basically calls it the greatest American documentary. And I kind of have to agree with him. I have to agree with him on that. And a number of factors. I first saw it in 1985 when I was 12 years old. It was on PBS, the local Chicago PBS channel, Channel 11, WTTW. And I became fascinated with the fest. I was fascinated when I was a little kid when I grabbed a hold of my dad's album. But I became fascinated with the fest and this whole thing of 400,000 people basically coming to this festival. Or in my grandparents' eyes, on my mom's side, this big concert where people did a lot of drugs. But I became fascinated. What was it about Woodstock that made it special? And I'm probably one of the few people from Generation X that actually probably gets it. And I have a lot to say about the fest, and I have a lot to say about what happened after the fest and subsequently. But that's a whole other video altogether. We're going to talk about film here and film technique. Wadleigh created an epic film. An epic film about an event that turned out to be an epic. And really, he wasn't interested in making a myth-making film as much of a political film, to be totally honest. He considered himself a political filmmaker. He only directed one other film in his entire film career, which was the environmentally themed horror film Wolfen, which came out in '81. And he didn't quite have final cut on that film, but what is in the film is still enough for him to actually support. But on Woodstock, he knew something was going to happen. This festival was being announced earlier in the year, I guess, or mid-year, based on everything that I've read. And he wanted to document it. The festival organizers, in particular, Michael Lang and Artie Kornfeld, along with John Roberts and Joel Rosenman, they wanted to have a film of the event. But they didn't want to own the film. They didn't want to put up the money themselves. The raw stock was paid by Michael Wadleigh, and he got the job after the legendary Albert and David Maysles didn't get the job after they saw his multi-screen editing techniques that he did. Young Martin Scorsese was the assistant editor, was co-supervising editor and assistant director on site. So Scorsese was at Woodstock. He famously wore cufflinks. 1 foot in the old neighborhood, 1 foot in Greenwich Village. And it was an adventure. And the making of the film, which is documented in associate producer Dale Bell's beautiful book with everybody who was involved in it, I think is just as legendary as the festival itself. What makes the film so great, and in my opinion, one of the greatest documentaries ever made? Two factors. The documentary sections. You have to be a bringer of news, even though the news in documentaries can be slanted. You could take documentary footage no matter how much you want to and edit it any different way. But I felt that Wadleigh and his team and the people that did the interviews, because he had two teams, a concert team and a documentary team that were out in the field asking questions. And the questions were pretty fair. You saw all sides. Yes, you had a lot of the townspeople saying that the people coming are beautiful people. But you also had the farmer who called it a shitty mess and explained why he called it a shitty mess. You also have, during the Jimi Hendrix sequence at the end of the film, Wadleigh intercutting after the fest, the big trash that the trash that was left, and people trying to clean it up. So you have that. And you have the footage of the traffic jam. You have the so-called scenes from a disaster area. But so it is a bringer of news. It does what a good documentary should. Bring news as accurately as you can and document things as accurately as you can. And then you have the concert footage. The performances are great. Or even if they were subpar, they knew how to film them and edit them to make them even more powerful. Now, Wadleigh was experimenting with multiple images, which became a stereotype after this film. But in Woodstock, they were innovative. He created a style in Woodstock that pretty much seemed an imitation when you saw Joe Cocker, Mad Dogs and Englishmen, or Elvis on tour in 1972. But he created a style, and the multi-screen images, they work. In the documentary sequences, you have Jerry Garcia talking about how amazing it looks from the helicopter with the cars on the road. And in the other panel, you have a helicopter shot of the traffic jam. And then in the concert sequences, I mean, you have when Daltrey is singing "See Me, Feel Me, Touch Me, Heal Me" from The Who, you begin with a single frame. Then all of a sudden, as the music starts to get even more epic, it cuts to 2 panels. And then a total of 3 panels on the screen. And they don't overdo it. I mean, they do it when it's necessary, like 10 Years After is all multi-screen, and the images overlap with Alvin Lee's fiery guitar playing. On the other hand, Joan Baez, she appears on one side of the screen with the other half totally blacked out as the image fades into black. Totally stark. The Richie Havens sequence, aesthetically, is something that needs to be watched to really show how a folk singer with an acoustic guitar can be transformed into something energetic. Punishing his guitar strings, strumming his acoustic guitar. Then you pan down to his foot pounding on the stage. Then you pan up to just his fingers again on the acoustic guitar. And then when he starts to sing, they pan over to the fingers on the fretboard of the guitar, fingering the chords. And then finally they cut to a close-up of his face singing the song. Brilliant. I mean, Woodstock is an epic. Now, some people could say it's a myth-making film. Some people could say it was horrible. Some people just don't get it. I think Monterey Pop is just as much of a myth-making film. Some people could argue, well, why didn't they bring a camera into the Bad Trips tent? I did not need to see several people freaking out to know about the Bad Trips. You see enough shots of people in the film anyways doing that. And the Maisels caught a lot of that. Albert and David Maisels caught a lot of that in Gimme Shelter. But I think he really focused on the fact that you could really tell that Woodstock became the people's festival. What was designed as a money-making venture, what was designed as a way to make a profit to eventually build a recording studio or something like that, the people took over because nobody expected that many people to show up. And the film does show that. And like I said, the film is pretty accurate. You do have the girl who stays in my mind who's panicking when she says, I have to get out of here because I can't stay here. There's just too many people. And she breaks down. And then one of the best pieces of documentary in there, done in one shot, no split screen, no trick camera work, just a simple close-up of the woman who's working the information booth, who says, she lost her sister, during Richie Havens' performance. She was on mescaline, and she's got her tickets home, and she hasn't seen her since. Now, you can tell just by the close-up, that she is really worried about her, but she puts on her front, she has to be back in time for court, otherwise I wouldn't care, I'd let her hitch home. But you can tell she is genuinely concerned about her. So that's why Woodstock to me is one of the greatest films and one of the greatest rock documentaries. It's got the performances. And Woodstock is also technically a great film. I think it's just as innovative as Star Wars it's the longest optical effect ever conceived. The film was shot 16 millimeter, and they had it with they were editing it with the multi-screen images and with the idea that it was going to be presented in a 2:3:5 CinemaScope aspect ratio. And they designed special mats to go with the single panel, the double panel, and the triple panel screens. And they had to get it to CinemaScope size, and even on some parts they spread the entire single image out to the full 2:3:5 frame from a 16 millimeter negative. And a lot of technical things are talked about in Dale Bell's book. That's when I was convinced that, it's really innovative. And then the stereo sound, and for the anniversary edition, the helicopters traveling overhead and things like that. It's really a technical feat. Now, I became obsessed with the film. It's one of my favorites. It was an epic film, which was shown in a Roadshow presentation with an intermission. And like West Side Story or Lawrence of Arabia, you got a program. I got this off eBay. This is the Roadshow program for Woodstock, the movie. Famous photo on the back. And brilliant photos inside. And yeah, there you go. To me, it is a must-see film. Now, this is a new thing that I'm starting called Rock Docs, and I figured I'd begin with Woodstock and talk about my feelings of Woodstock. The next one is going to be D.A. Pennebaker's Monterey Pop, about the festival that started it all. Thank you.